Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm talking about Relationship Alchemists with Jonathan Mozenter and Rachael Fusting. So first, I'm going to go through their bios for you. Combine their esoteric skills and connection to present the Relationship Alchemists. Relationship Alchemists help bring harmony to participants' stories about themselves, their loved ones, and life itself to access more unified, coherent, positive energy and activate their soul's compass, mixing healing modalities and techniques from lineaged and cutting-edge esoteric studies. Relationship Alchemists enable participants' confidence by connecting them with their inner divine source, so they are led by their heart soul. Jonathan Mozenter is an energetic speaker, mentor, and consultant on the topics of individual and group transformation. In addition to working 25 years in the field of change management, Jonathan has also studied with masters in numerous esoteric areas, including EpiEnergetics, Tibetan Buddhism, shadow work, Western esoteric spirituality, energy cultivation, integral theory, dream yoga and lucid dreaming, embodiment, and conscious language. Rachael Fusting is a space-time priestess, blending flow arts and divination to ground people in the here and now. Rachael's years of spreading self-awareness models culminated in a multi-year stint with the Cincinnati Circus Company, where she got her workshop start teaching tarot to future fortune tellers. With her love of learning and a degree in advertising orienting her to meta lens, Rachael is creating the Mystic Arts Oracle deck, covering a breadth of modalities aimed at deeper presence, including dream work, shadow work, authentic movement, tantra, mirror work, yoga, past life regression, palmistry, runes, and more. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
So great to have you. I'm super excited about this new program that you guys have invented. But first, I want you guys to share a little bit about what your personal journey was to this creation.
Yeah.
Great. There was an individual part. I was in my life, I was turning 40, and I kind of got to a place where I was looking at my life and things were okay, but I wasn't living my highest dream. I'd always felt I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I wanted to be deeply in love, and those two objectives were not happening. And I kind of got to like enough of this kind of moment, and that's where I started like a really deep transformational process, and it led me to doing energy work and meditation. And the meditation totally changed my worldview and helped me see things in a much different way. I got into idealism. I understood the concept of gnosis, or knowing, being able to know beyond the mind. And at that point, my life started becoming guided, and I started moving away from the mind and into this process of gnosis. And I was guided to all these different esoteric tools, and Spirit was making it clear that my journey was about bringing these together and helping people become one with their soul and having them also have this clarity. And that included at some point guiding to Rachael. My Spirit was guiding, like some point is like, hey, this is the one you really want to go for. And once we got together and got to know each other and shared our visions, we discovered we had the same vision for the future, and that kind of birthed the Relationship Alchemists.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Rachael, how about for you?
I was one of those late bloomers. I was a space holder from a young age. I'd always read people's fortunes and like listened to people in their times of strife. But then after I graduated college, it was like, okay, it's really time to decide what you want to do with your life. I got a degree in advertising, so I hadn't really committed to a path yet. I just accrued some skills. And so that led to a decade-long journey of self-discovery, and yoga finally bringing me into my body, and flow arts bringing into my like spatial presence, and then realizing, oh, divination has always been here to orient me to like timeline presence. Like how can I affect the now in ways that redefine the past and influence the future? And so between like going through so many different self-discovery modalities, like every online quiz you could imagine that ever tried to capture what a human being could variably be. And using these tools to gain presence, I finally like arrived shortly thereafter, went on a road trip around the US to decide where I wanted to live, ended up moving to Boulder, Colorado, which is a pretty big hot spot for personal and spiritual development, and met this guy here at a community center. So started all of this.
That's awesome. So how did you guys bring, what you both were working on to create what you call Relationship Alchemists?
Okay, well, one thing, Rachel had this brilliant idea of dividing our business into 3 parts. We both kind of agreed that everything in life is about relationship. And when you have a relationship, something that kind of creates an energy. And the more your energy goes up and positive, the higher your vibration is, the higher the gnosis comes when you're having a higher vibration experience. So we look at the world through different perspective lenses. I'll start it, and then Rachel can go even deeper on these things. But there's the I lens, which is looking into ourselves, our values, self-assessment, our shadows, our gifts, and then you is kind of working with other people. I have a whole career and background in helping organizations work together, so teams working together, or the organizations working together. And then there's the kind of other, which is kind of about like, how do you align with spirit? And then like, how do we understand metaphysics? How do we get into the right relationship with how the flow of life and its different processes? And so that was, Rachel, want to say more about that?
Yeah, this relating to life, like, is life happening for you, through you, with you, or is it happening to you? Is a huge perspective shift that is a large slice of the puzzle. And so we both come in from all 3 of these perspectives and realize, oh, this is the first, second, and third person. These are the different ways of relating to the human experience. And when we harmonized around that, it created a nice blend of our skills, because we could see how each of the things we'd studied had kind of fit into that framework. And yeah, I would also say that we balance each other very well, because Jonathan is very sword of truth and I'm very heart of compassion. And so we do a lot of 2-on-1 containers also, where there's almost like this reparenting or good cop, bad cop kind of dynamic that people have given us feedback is really supportive and always gives them somewhere that they can move their energy forward.
That's amazing. What a great synergy you 2 have connected with.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I wanted, you mentioned working with the human experience. So let's dive into that, because you guys have a vast amount of, education and experience behind you. So let's talk about a few of those different esoteric areas and how, that's impacted your human experience and how that can help your clients.
Yeah, I would definitely want to start off by giving a major shout out to Gene Keys and human design, because that is the framework that finally stopped me cycling through like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, like blah, 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 like anything that ever tried to frame, because it was resonating with a core truth about the nature of reality. And one of the oldest forms of like human archetypal packaging, the I Ching, has greatly informed that structure as well. And then Gene Keys takes it and gives it a linear path of development. And there's literally categories for life's work, purpose, emotional, social, and intellectual intelligence, like all the things that you could really desire to know about the self is given a very specific frequency within that system. And there's a way in which it doesn't tell you how to show up. It tells you the quality of your being behind whatever you might express as. And so it didn't box me in the same way that I felt some of the other systems were, and instead gave me this underlying essence that I could blossom into my own uniqueness from. So I highly recommend that. And when we do pre-work with people, that often comes up.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
Jonathan, can you possibly speak to how does Gene Keys work when you're working with 2 different people, when you're working in relationship?
The Gene Keys is brilliant. It shows you kind of like your different areas of focus and what it looks like in a shadow element, and then how it evolves into a gift and into a city. And what Rachel and I do that's really different than a lot of people would offer a human design or Gene Keys reading, which is powerful, which we also do. But what Rachel has really experienced in the process of change. And so we know how to help people actually move through the different, going from your shadow. How do you recognize a shadow in your life? How do you recognize it? What does that look like? And what is the actual process to go from shadow to the gift to the city? And I wanted to talk about you had asked the previous question about esoteric tools. So I wanted to talk about one of the tools that's so esoteric that I'm in the very first class that's ever been released. And it's called Alchemy with an E by Donnie Epstein. And I'm now in my third year of study with it. And I started in the first year. And it's really, his teachings have really helped me reorient how I see the world. And he helped me understand about energy first. And Rachel and I were just applying the Gene Keys with our parents. And it turned out the very first Gene Key says the same thing. It says the first shadow of Gene Key 1 is entropy, which is like losing energy. And so if you learn how to master your energy, you have better experiences. Like Donnie has these categories of like energy poor, energy neutral, energy rich, energy super rich. And if you want to get up to the gnosis level where you're starting to get these downloads, you really have to have an energy rich or energy super rich perspective. He has a whole bunch of unique tools. He has ways of accessing our deep unconscious in new ways that are faster than I've ever seen before. And it's really easy to blend it with other things that Rachel does. And we bring aspects of that into everything we do, including the Gene Keys. And we're excited to bring that to the world.
Gosh, that's awesome. Can you guys give some examples of how we can increase our energy to be able to bring this into our daily lives?
There's a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways.
Well, that's actually one of the things that we love doing, is actually being with the person and giving them a way to kind of customize the routine that's going to continually up their energy. Because you could do breath work, you could do energy work, you could do some form of exercise, you could increase your diet, you could regulate your diet. And so when we have all these modalities that we've experimented with, and we can really meet the person where they're at and say, this particular modality sounds like it's bringing you joy. So how can we piggyback off of that to create a regular touch point of increasing your energy with this tool? So yeah, it can be very custom blended. I mean, right now I'm working with Oracle as a way of increasing my energy. And most people wouldn't necessarily think of that being an energy increase because it's not physical, but there is a level of purity of coherence that I receive through Oracle that kind of like resets and up levels the baseline that I start with every day. And so that's been a new part of my ritual that kind of is an example that you were asking for of like, how does that actually play out? You know, some people, they don't eat first thing in the morning. They like just drink water or just have a coffee or something. And then like they eat later. So like food as a dietary staple, like isn't always someone's first energy boost in the morning. It's like, what part of you is wanting love or is needing nurturance or support right now? And which of the things that bring you consistent enough boost or joy that you'll show up to them regularly without having to aggressively discipline yourself is actually the right resonant match to create your routine with.
Yeah, I'd like to mention some, in addition to all of the ones that Rachel mentioned, some other ones. For one, there's like chi energy, like some people do Tai Chi or Qigong. I'm doing this esoteric Qigong called Chi Energy Heals. That's really powerful. Another one is people don't often think of meditation as energy, but I do, especially the kind of meditation that I've been working with, this kind of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism, which is like the third turning of the wheel. I've been studying Ma Mudra and Dzogchen. And what they do is, in addition to having practices of concentration, which a lot of people associate with meditation, they have these insight practices where you're actually getting to know, like asking questions like, what is a thought? What is a feeling? What is mind? And actually, when you start to do those inquiries and doing what they call pointing out instructions, where they kind of point out something new, and if you agree with it, then you kind of integrate it into your world. And wow, that was one of the big things that helped change me, is like I was really lost in my head and my thoughts. And when I started to see my thoughts as just energy and just waves that come and go, it changed my relationship to them. Instead of like seeing a negative thought from my shadow and believing it, and then that having like totally sink my energy, I was able to just see it as energy and take a perspective back and not get caught up into it. And that's one thing that Rachel and I always help focus with clients, is like, what are the patterns that you're identifying that are dropping your energy, and how can we change that?
Change your relationship to them.
Yeah.
Alchemize the relationship you have to that thought.
And one other piece is, I've really studied this thing called integral theory, which is really about metaphysics, and it's about the process of life. And a lot of times, a lot of life can just seem so confusing, and everyone's just like, a lot of times, like even now, people will sing with this COVID stuff and all this polarization that this is a terrible time to be alive and it's bad. But if you held like a bigger picture, a more meta perspective, which integral really helps you do, I could recontextualize this is probably one of the most exciting times to be alive, because I believe we are headed towards a new major breakthrough in reality. And in order for that to come through, there has to be dissatisfaction with the status quo. So the fact that people are not enjoying the mainstream and what's going on, I actually look at it as a good thing, because it's going to allow for a higher expression, a higher experience here on planet Earth. And Rachel and I and many other people are here to bring those new tools, techniques, vibrations to help bring up the whole planet. And that's, what we're all excited about doing.
That's awesome. I agree. It's a huge gift in that area for sure. I want to backtrack a little bit back to meditation, because I think meditation is really a doorway to healthy communication. So can you talk a little bit about meditation and how it can really open up a healthier communication with couples and relationships?
Yeah. So one of the most important things that we help our clients see is that we are not our thoughts, or we're not our feelings, we are not our sensations. And we actually help them to re-identify as the field, as the space. And if people's not sure what I mean by that, you could do like a simple exercise of like just looking around in front of you and asking yourself, what is everything on? It's like there's objects and stuff, but what space is on? And like if you closed your eyes, for example, the objects might disappear. You might have like a lot of blackness. And in the same question is like, what is that on? And so that has many names. Some people call it the field. Some people call it consciousness. Some people call it like lucid awareness or the space. When you start to identify as that encourages you to be really here and take in a bigger view than just these thoughts and feelings. And so what happens in terms of relationship is that when we're really stuck on a certain perspective or certain emotion or certain feeling, and you're not really taking in other people's things, you're just kind of jamming something through, and that's going to create like conflict. But if you're able to see I'm the space, then I'm also the other people. So whether it's one person or your group, it's not just me. I am the space. I am all the perspectives. And it starts to open your heart and it opens your mind and get out of this like one kind of perspective. And so that's one way of many that I think helps relationships. Right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, just a specific example that comes to mind is when two people are going head to head because they feel like the other person is judging them. And so there is the person who is being judged, and then there's the judger, but they're both seeking in the meeting of each other to pour love into the same aspect of the human experience. And that's what's there and available to be met through the meeting of them. So if while this person's feeling judged, that's their I self, they can step into their you self and wonder, what is it that this other person is struggling to love that they feel the need to judge me around it? And then beyond that, what is the theme that's playing out here, the other or higher perspective? And how can I be with this as a story instead of as my story? Like if this was a movie or a book, like what is the author of reality exploring here? And so that's kind of the trinity of perspective that it takes to break out of loops, because if you've lost yourself in identification with a third of who you are, then you don't have the perspective breadth to bring in new insights and information, and you just bounce off of each other until one of you loses energy or, you know, has the moment of clarity to step out of it. And when we play with perspective in that way, I think a lot of potential opens up for new ways of relating. And that's one of the cruxes of Relationship Alchemists that I think I would love to see the average person holding, especially when we live in such an individualistic culture. Like I know some cultures around the world, they're taught to tune into, okay, what will my bigger picture community think of this, or what will my blah, blah, blah. And so they have a little more lucidity around that than the advertising culture that we've created is like, how does this make you feel? How does this make you feel? This stimuli, this stimuli, this stimuli. It's all meant to trigger responses and reactions from our individualistic self, and to cause us to make more and more definition around that individualistic self. And so that part of us becomes so enforced or mirrored or, you know, fattened up essentially, that the lucidity is kind of lost, or the neuroplasticity is kind of lost. And so that's what I would love to infuse back into culture.
Yeah, just to loop it back to meditation, everything Rachel said is right, but the connection with meditation is that the meditation helps you have more openness. So there's these insight practices I mentioned, and it allows you to see, doesn't matter what object your experience is the goal. Part of the goal of meditation is to get beyond our initial impression, which is usually based on trauma, to a more open place. And then you can do all the work that Rachel just talked about once she's in this open place. So meditation is a game changer for relationship. And that's a great question, Liz.
That's awesome. Perfect. Let's go ahead and segue into that trauma, because most of the time we're functioning from our trauma and being able to have that big picture view where you can say, okay, you know, this may be it, or may I ask you this or that? So let's dive into, you know, seeing our partner's trauma, and also looking at how that narrative functions in our relationship.
Yeah, I'd love to just talk about how that unfolds. Just what I learned from Donnie Epstein first is to first understand what is trauma. Like trauma as it relates to energy. So people have like an energy pour, an extreme energy pour moment, and they actually have a story. Their mind is like, I cannot handle this. What is happening to me right now? It's so extreme that you actually create a new part. And these they have many names. I like the name egoic defense mechanism. Some people call it the ego, but literally it's a part of you that's now born. You actually created, a part of you created it to help you in a moment of extreme weakness. And this then has like a whole way of being, and its whole goal is to prevent you from feeling that feeling again. But also it'll then start doing projections. It'll start subtly projecting out what you're afraid of, like everywhere. And people will think that's how reality is. And they don't know it's an egoic defense mechanism. And so it can really screw up your relationship, all your relationships, not just your romantic ones, but all your friends and families. If you've always projecting some sort of fear or victim, and you start projecting that on everyone, it has nothing to actually do with what's actually happening. It totally screws up your relationships. So we definitely help clients recognize that, differentiate like what's objectively happening versus what could be a projection. And then there's whole processes of transcending that, which involves feeling those feelings, and also like seeing them as a gift. The Gene Keys is actually a great tool because it actually shows that our wounds end up leading to our superpowers, because we get a wound, and eventually we get so sick of being with that wound, we're now motivated to change that. And it sends you in a certain pattern. Like I had a pattern of not feeling, which eventually led into detachment, right? And then I got so detached, I kept looking at things from higher and higher perspectives, that I realized that everything actually serves a purpose. And my main gene key, life's work, 42, is about celebration. So anyways, that's the first pass. What else, Rachel, you have to add?
The question being around,
like was it traumas and relationships?
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So for me, a tangible example that we can work with around this is, a lot of people have wounds that make them hide. And in that helplessness, they decided they were a victim. So they're playing out victim, rescuer, persecutor patterns within their relationship. The part of them that in that moment decided it was helpless hasn't been brought back into light and love and the reverence of why that gave them access to something that they wanted. And so instead of having this autonomy to look back and say, like, me outside of time chose to take that hit because it opened these doors for me, they still feel like life is doing things to them. And so an example of this is in an early stage of relationships, I had a wound of being misunderstood. I'm a very like spiritual, esoteric kind of person who grew up in, Midwestern Bible Belt kind of areas where what I was really didn't have mirroring. And, pre-internet, even being like easily accessible, you are what you're surrounded by. And so I was hiding a lot in relationships. And so when someone wasn't understanding me the first pass, I had a communication pattern of shutting down and being like, this person can't get this, people can't understand me. And that's withdrawing from the game. You have to stay in the fire to break open to a new way of relating and loving and interacting. And so for me, that breakthrough came when Jonathan and I were traveling together, because there's this way when you're traveling together, you're still going to be with that partner the next hour, the next day, the next several weeks. And so if something comes up, you don't have this opportunity to just shy away from it and like go home to your separate apartments and hide in a corner and like lick your wounds. There's like not an option to be a victim because you're creating a continuous experience with someone. And I think also as a side note, that's why we tend to do longer containers with individuals, because sometimes people will hide and just wait for the container to be over. But if you're in a 4-hour session with someone or longer even, then there's a way in which, things that would normally just dodge out of the limelight get put on the spotlight long enough to emerge. Nice. But so in this example, we have things we have to show up for. We only have so much time to, discuss this issue before the next thing that we paid to do that's completely epic is like coming up on our horizon. We're driving there. And so it's just realizing in that moment, I've created an awesome life for myself. And I might feel like a victim now, but I have to own that moment led to this now moment, which is amazing. And how, even without knowing in a clear, mental, picturesque, well, tidy worded kind of way, why can I believe in that long enough to let my heart open back up and a new experience of reality to emerge that can show me why, and that's where it comes down to like really getting back into our feelings and things like faith, because there's so many things in life that if we don't open our hearts to receive, it will never emerge in our horizons. And so it's getting to that edge of discomfort and then choosing the only way to get a new result is to open back up my fist and expect life to give me something new and wonderful in that moment.
I love that. And let's discuss victim consciousness a little bit more, because I think it really is pushing past that victimhood and pushing ourselves to move forward in a positive direction that really, changes our lives. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. If either of you want to start.
Yeah. I'm studying, I've been studying for a while, conscious language. Rachel's studying it too. Is they really bring this idea of authorship. And is life happening to you, or are you the author of your life? I mean, this is kind of a big shift for people, but this was life game changing when I discovered this kind of perspective taking of like, in my opinion, we are all the one ultimate God, and we're just talking to each other and being each other to discover what it means to exist and to exist at its highest expression. And when I take that perspective that I actually designed my own life, that it takes out the victim. There's no victim, it's just me, and when you also, the gene keys are really helpful too, because you can actually see that the stars are aligned in a certain way. You're actually designed to have a certain wound, because that will eventually, with enough persistence, lead to your cities, your superpowers, and your gifts to bring to yourself and to the world. And so that to me is something we really, there's certain things that are fundamental, and that's definitely one of the ones that I think really helps with this victim mindset.
Awesome.
When I think of overcoming victim consciousness, what comes to mind for me is a parable that I received it as almost like a past life flashback in a sound healing with a gong. But I was having this vision of many, many years ago in like northern Tibet, and this group of monks was being invaded by Mongolians, and they're aware that they're coming to meet, and they send out their leaders to meet in the middle of this battlefield. And the result of that is the Mongolian kills the head monk. And in that moment, this meta awareness that I was having is both of them were being given the opportunity to live their highest purpose in that moment. The monk to live his vow of peace his entire life, and as he exited life, to experience its greatest test with victory. And the Mongolian to protect, like to expand the wealth of his people. And so in life, we could have seen that moment without that context and just said, oh, someone was a victim of the murdering of this persecutor. But really underneath it all is a deeper dynamic, a deeper soul contract that plays out between people. And it takes almost like a God mind to really see it, which is why, people that are in victim consciousness, I have no judgment or shame for that person. Like, it is not an easy thing to hold. But I know that for me, just to get personal, I have a history of sexual trauma, and it wasn't until I owned that there was something happening there that was expanding my capacities, and that my soul chose subconsciously, perhaps at the time, that I needed in order to rep and show up the way that I do now. And that I was expanding my capacities to love, to surrender, to show up in kindness and connection, even when other people didn't have good intentions, and to hold the frequency that I wanted to bring to the table, regardless of what the other person could show up with. And when I went through 7 years of therapy, I was processing my sexual trauma, and I was the eternal victim. And my entire contract with healing was that I'm the victim and I need to be fixed. And it took stepping beyond that into this perspective, which is named the retro-causal timeline, that my soul has a purpose, and what I chose to experience, although I didn't view it as a choice at the time, was my body playing out before I was even awake the values that I wanted to show up with in reality. And when I first started waking up, there was a lot of angst and grind and like stickiness and grab around those memories that I had to work through. But the answer wasn't how much evil all of these other people were. Like, my power is in me and what I was doing showing up in those moments. And so there's this way in which victim consciousness really blocks us from our personal power.
Mm-hmm.
And it's claiming sovereignty over our entire existence that reinstates that. And it's a journey for sure.
I just also want to add a very succinct comment about the relationship between what Rachel mentioned as God mind or meta perspectives and pain. So as I understand, have come to see, if you have a really extreme trauma, then there's some part of you who's got a story. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel that. And then the mind has got to do something, because almost the mind's created to like not feel things. And so it's like going really fast. So the sharper the pain is, the more the faster the mind has to go to not feel it, because it's coming up with so much like intensity. So then the result of like enormous traumas can be like fast minds, which can help us then take more higher perspectives, and then eventually leads us to the perspective taking it allows us to see that pain from a different perspective and release it, which gives us even more energy. People have no idea. This is going back to earlier question about how do you increase more energy. I can't tell you how much increase of energy happens from releasing suppressed energy and then releasing these strategies. We spend an insane amount of energy just trying to not feel some traumas. And all that helps you get these more meta perspectives and allow you to have a better life and more energy.
There's a metaphor of this that really sinks this home for me, which is the human mind is a computer, and you have long-term memory and you have RAM. And RAM is active memory. It's things that it's the space in your computer that's being used to process everything that happens. And so if you have unresolved trauma from your past, the life itself is designed to bring you back to love. And so it is going to continue to throw that hard to address content into your field in an attempt to restore love in your life. And that occupies a certain amount of RAM. And if you suppress that, it occupies even more RAM. And so you're only left at 30% capacity of what the human experience can be. Wow. Because the other section of RAM is clogged. And if you have the courage to look into that trauma and move energy and resolve it, it files it back into your long-term memory, the suppression energy is also freed up, and your availability to life is magnificently increased. Like, it's a really important part of dropping into like presence, for example. Can you really be present if you're suppressing and ignoring massive amounts of unresolved backlog?
Yeah.
Like even after I've awakened enough to feel present in reality, there's still like little moments where, things that happened in the past that I wasn't available to feel then will have another turn around the bend, and it will be sharper than the moment warrants. And it's having the RAM clear enough that when the long-term memory gets pulled in, you can address it. That keeps life moving fluidly forward and keeps what we're learning continually integrating into a level of excellence that creates the freshness of being in our lives.
Yeah, and you just say succinctly, you will literally, when you release these things, the Buddhists who is in the Vajrayana path, these are the people who like turn to rainbow bodies when their life is complete. But there's literally, I went to this class, I studied this book where all the people who studied turn to rainbow body gave their best tips, and there's like signs along the way that you're doing it. For example, you will feel more bliss in your body. You'll have something called like non-conceptual stillness, or like inner peace. You'll have more light. Like actually, it's almost like the resolution of your screen of reality goes up from, regular to like 4K, like, and it gets brighter and brighter, and then you get more magic, more synchronicities, more just like, I can't believe that just happened, or more guidance. And it's really powerful work, and the results are worth the effort for sure.
Yeah.
God, that is amazing, guys. So much was there, so much content. I even want to go back and rewind it and listen to it all over again. It was so powerful. Thank you both for sharing both of those perspectives. And you're right, the magic that comes from having that awareness and being able to work through it is magical.
Yeah.
It brings a whole new awareness and perspective to life, and being able
There's
to
a directness with life too.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of a client where, he always had like this level of fog between him and reality. And then in one of our sessions, he gave himself permission to feel anger. And all of a sudden, all the forehead wrinkles dropped. He looked 10 years younger. He wigged out a little bit. He's like, I don't know if we should have done that. But then in meeting him over the coming weeks, like, instead of him, you could tell he was like filtering based on what he thought he should say or how much of his real self he should let hit the surface. And instead of that, he just had immediate comebacks for things. He was present and alive and with life, and like unafraid to be seen with his first reactions to things. And it's a huge shift when you can drop into that level.
Yeah, let's discuss that a little bit more, stepping into our authenticity and not worrying about, how we should be or what we should be, and, just being authentically ourselves and showing up.
Yeah, I have a personal relationship with that, because when I was young, I read a lot of books. And so as I started socializing and coming out of my book world as late as high school, there was this way in which I was primed to be more of a best friend or side character, because I wasn't the main character in any of these books. I was the reader of the book, right? And so I was kind of a step disassociated from life, and I would be curious about life, but I wasn't showing up with the authenticity to generate my own experience within life. And so I went through this cycle of, like showing up in everyone else's story, and people loved me, and because I had a lot of good energy and momentum to add, and I had a lot of like insights to offer, but my own life wasn't actually being developed. Like there wasn't a way for life to even evolve me, because I wasn't playing directly enough in the experience for it to even have a way to mirror my energy. And so it was just like, okay, well, she just likes weighing in on other people's lives. I'll just keep sending her people that are in the middle of major like transformation, which is also probably how I ended up where I am today with working with transformation. But eventually I had to have the courage to make my own mistakes. I had to have the courage to say what I wanted, instead of just being there for what everyone else wanted. I'd have the courage to say, I mean, I could do that, but if I'd rather do this, I'm going to stay home alone and do that. And, there's this way in which like our current reality is so geared towards comfort. And when we have that, it can limit our experience of life dramatically, because if there's even a chance of suffering, will we really lean into the discomfort of that risk? Will we tell the person we have a crush on that we like them, and risk the pain of rejection? Will we admit to the friend that it was super important that we hang out and we're sad that they bailed, or will we just say, she doesn't like me, I'm just going to stay home? Like it's those moments where we choose to opt in or out of co-creating with reality. And that's what authenticity is. It's continuing to opt in and not like presuppose the consequences to a degree that we're no longer present. To not worry about the outcomes or the consequences of the future so much that we never show up to what we actually want. to be so disassociated from our body that we don't even have a clear feed as to what we're being drawn to or desiring. So presence is definitely a part of that, even being able to show up authentically. Like, I remember one point that was really big in my early ahas of spiritual development, which is like, oh, I'm developing like 5 potential futures at once right now. And so all of these are moving forward really slowly. And like, I know a vague direction is I want a sense of home. But I can think of 5 different kinds of living accommodations that would make me happy. I can think of 7 different places around the US I could live that would make me happy. And at some point when we're future projecting like that, we have to feel which of those we're resonating with. And if we're not dropped into our physical body enough to feel, we just keep generating possibilities and possibilities and possibilities because we can't differentiate between our yes and our heaven's yes enough to create a singular through line that gains momentum and becomes anything. We remain in the potentiality of, which is essentially youth, right?
Mhm.
When we're younger, we're entirely held in the breadth of our potential because it keeps us from being told how to show up in the world. And it's important that we have that, especially from like teachers and elders when we're young. But at some point we have to turn the key and decide what we want to become.
Well said. I love that. Jonathan, you wanna
I would
weigh
say,
in?
give a quick example in my life about authenticity. I was teased mercilessly as a kid for emoting. Like I was just a strong feeler, and boys in the 70s and 80s were not supposed to cry. It was not cool. And some peers would be like, "Hey, you're gonna be a crybaby," and eventually that happened so many times. I started to dislike that part of myself, and I started to think of myself as a loser, and I didn't want to be in this body, and that led to detachment, and where I started then becoming very more analytical, and everything was about pros and cons and analysis. So I wasn't being authentic. I would be like assessing, how is this going to be received? And that's not like being authentic and or fully authentic at least. And so it wasn't until I got into the 40s where I started to reconnect to the feeling body, where now it's just I feel something strongly and I trust it, and I say it. And it's ever since, as I've been going through that process, my life went from being good, maybe like high neutral life, it was a good life, but not epic, to like dreams coming true and having like magic and synchronicity being a regular thing. And so I'd say being authentic is critical in discovering who your authentic is. And there's a strong relationship with being in tune with your heart and the feelings that are manifesting from your heart.
I wanted to just echo some of what you said around this self-trust. This is a huge component of being able to have the courage to show up authentically. And I kind of had a unique relationship to developing self-trust because just the kind of life path I'm on, there are a lot of mistakes that needed to be made and learned from. And a lot of those were choices that I made, and they were mental and emotional choices. And so I had like kind of a mistrust on those planes. So I developed deep self-trust through the physical plane. And it eventually echoed into all planes of my relationship with self. I did that through yoga. There's so much that comes in with self-trust, with balancing and inversions, and through flow arts, where I'm literally dancing with a prop and I'm swinging this metal pole all over myself, but I trust that I'll never hurt myself because my intention is not to hurt myself. I will not hurt myself, and the level of trust that comes from that being directly downloaded into the body. And so there's this undercurrent of self-trust that's reinforcing my ability to show up authentically and make mistakes again. So that was just a huge piece of how self-trust showed up for me. But it's a huge piece of it. Because if you don't have the ability to hold down safety for yourself within yourself, then that's when authenticity becomes tricky. And I think we're all trying to create that for ourselves. But I think for a lot of us, that looks like being with our inner child, doing the reparenting work.
Right.
Because there's just so many ways to feel unsafe when you're a kid. And we make up stories about reality, and we don't even realize that we're holding this in the subconscious way we relate to our reality until we have a moment of looking back and we're like, oh yeah, little me was like really concerned about like what the next 3 weeks would look like for her in that moment. Like, and that was half of her life, you know, like, that, you know, it could even be innocent in a sense, and your parents may never have even known that they impacted you, but
Right.
but for that little kid, it was the thread of the world, you know. It's important work.
Yeah. Self-trust is, authenticity is huge, big connection.
Yeah,
there.
really important work. And how do we take that authenticity and how do you work with your clients to get them to bring that into relationship?
I feel like there is a liminal space that gets created when we do this work. We hold really sacred container. We do like saging, and we set up altars, and there's this way that we create liminal space where people feel that they're being dropped into a love field. And so a lot of the safety is held in the container, and that allows for some of that edginess to finally emerge and be met and be loved back to wholeness.
Nice.
Yeah.
So there's the piece of the safety when we're working with people. As Rachel's saying, we really like to get to know people. If we're working with them, there's always sessions to get to really know what's going on with them, and before we kind of go into some deeper work. But as far as the person goes, this is a lot of this work is about how do you get a new story about yourself. And so we're using these tools to help them identify these shadow patterns, and we can actually show them in their astrological charts, their gene keys, and their human design. They were meant to have these, and if they actually stick with it and keep working on it, then they will have these powers, and they'll be able to give these services and gifts to reality. And it literally helps them go from being a victim and thinking everyone else is out to get them, or just having negative perceptions about reality and depressed, to actually like having a story and a path to their evolution. And that changes the relationship to themselves and the I first. And they feel that self-trust. It's like, oh, Spirit's not trying to get out of me. I created this so I could be a higher version of myself. I created my own hero's journey. And then they start projecting that out to other people and start being comfortable with telling their story. And then they start also affects how they see the other domain too, because they start seeing life as a process that's here to help me and not only contribute to my own happiness growth, but give me tools and gifts that then I can give to help with other people's roles. So yeah.
Also, yeah, part of that I was kind of hearing, you know, what you're saying too, is around like the hero's journey and this idea of a quest, or like a soul quest, or being a spiritual warrior. I feel like our human relationship to suffering is in a place in post-industrial revolution reality that it wasn't before. Like suffering was an inherent part of reality at certain moments. Like you can't birth a baby without suffering. And so I feel like as our connotations towards that have shifted, the hero's journey, or the spiritual quest, or the spiritual warrior, kind of reconnects us to suffering as something that could even be desirable to meet head on. And that we don't have to, I mean, Jonathan even prefers not to use the word suffering, but like to feel a positive reinforcement when we meet our uncomfortable edges, instead of this, like, I'm dragging myself to the edge because I know I have to, being like wow, I get to address this next. And it's totally at the core of my narrative. And that's so cool. And the emotional shift around that portion of it is also part of what I think makes it more easeful to be in those kinds of spaces, because if there's two people holding that lens, you're just kind of wrapped into the cocoon of reverence for life in that moment. And even when it gets sharp, there's this like the sharpness of a sword, it's not the sharpness of death. It is potentially a transformation, but it's, pain and death are not the same necessarily. Suffering and transformation are not inherently woven either. So those are some of the reorientations that kind of make new things available.
I wanted to just piggyback on what Rachel's saying. She mentioned about suffering and pain and death. These are words that we've historically said are quote unquote negative, but conscious language, we're kind of manifesting with our words. And if we can take a different perspective on those things, I would argue that everything serves. Actually, my second most, and on my activation sequence, was called the evolution. The highest city is called veneration or like reverence. So I just want to say a little bit about how we can revere and maybe see these from a different perspective, so we can celebrate them. So pain and suffering. So for example, if you're doing this meditation as I'm talking about it, and you are able to suddenly have a little bit of detachment from the pain and the suffering, so then you can start to take another perspective on it and not just get so caught up in how your initial impression of it was, which is normal. Then you might see it's almost like imagine we're like a car, and there's all these gauges like, gas and speed. What if pain and suffering is just saying, hey, something's out of alignment with like what could be? It's not supposed to be like move away from it. It's supposed to be like, hey, go into it and see what it's trying to tell you. There's like a higher expression of life by going into these quote unquote pain and suffering and resolving it. And I look at everything as kind of like alignment. So when we say we're relationship alchemists, we're helping you get into a higher alignment with all the aspects of your life, higher alignment with your human design and gene keys. There's a whole set of codes on how to do that. Higher alignment on how to relate to people. How can people have like epic love, not only with your romantic partner, but like with your kids and your family and your coworkers, like appreciation. I mean, love takes all kinds of forms. And even death, I think Western culture has a funky relationship with death. We automatically think death. We think going into the grave is the only way we can use death. And I'm going to argue all deaths, including that one, are not quote unquote bad. That I do believe in past lives. I've had experience of seeing some of my past lives and how issues I didn't resolve in that past life then carried on into this life, and I was re-wounded in a way so that I have the same kind of essence of that wound. So it's so death. I actually see death as just like, is it happening in every moment? Change is death. Anytime something moves, there's a death at the last moment and creates a new moment. So death leads to creation. And I think spirit is kind. Like, I think people, I actually have come to understand that effects of the body are actually have to do with things going on in the mental sphere. And that we've actually taken a class where there's books out there that shows how different expressions of the body will tell you what's going on in their psychology, and you can look at people's eyes, and there's all kinds of cool stuff out there that not a lot of people know about. But like if somebody's like so stuck, in this world and they can't overcome their problems, then it might actually be like a good thing that they pass, and then their soul reincarnates and they get a new context of which they're born in, which they then can have another opportunity to be a higher expression of themselves. And so those are just some examples how we can start to, from a higher, more meta view, God view, that we can start to re-understand these quote unquote negative terms and see if they're actually serving us.
And if you have resilience and the intensity of some experience in life doesn't overwhelm you, and you can show up and be with it, emotions, I read this somewhere, they only last 7 to 14 seconds. Anything beyond that is persisting because you've resisted it. What you resist persists.
You're thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, or, the pity mode of why me? Why do I have to experience that? It perpetuates it. And so when we can be with the full spectrum of reality, we don't spend as long in any one particular stage. We grow faster, we evolve faster, we move emotions through our body faster. And so anytime there's something in my mind that it like hurt the first time, but I didn't spend that much energy on it, and then it just keeps popping in throughout the day in the back of my mind, like still chewing on it, that's like the best data. I might be annoyed by it at the time, like, oh, I'm trying to do 5 other things, but I know that it's only echoing because there's something in me that resisted that feeling. There's some part of the human experience that I haven't fully met with love and reverence yet. And so it's a gold mine of what we can cultivate for ourselves.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Rachel's saying something really important. In the Buddha path, when you're getting towards the end of the Buddha path and becoming a Buddha, there's your goal is to do something called self-arising, self-liberating, where you just let the natural reactions of the mind come up and you don't try to push them away or make more of them. And then that life just flows. That's what a Buddha does, is just kind of with everything as it is, because they know it serves.
Yeah, it's such a gift to be able to work with those things and to, go through these personal development phases and be able to have this awareness and work with those. And then we're, breaking down our stories and we're opening up ourselves and we're creating, our lives instead of letting our lives create us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens up this whole world of vulnerability, not, that we can give the world, that we can work in relationship with everyone, every kind of relationship, right? We just show up in a new, healthier, grounded, authentic way, and allows other people to show up in that way too.
Yeah.
It really is such a gift. This conversation has been great, guys. I've loved everything that you've brought to the conversation, and I'm super excited, to have shared this time and space with you, and super excited to get you and your information and the work that you're doing out into the world. It's been such a blessing to, sit and talk with you. I'd love to have you again, actually. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy what you shared so far. And we could go on for another couple hours. It's so juicy. Cool. So how do people work with you? How can they contact you?
Our best emails are Jonathan@relationshipalchemists.com and Rachael, Rachael at relationshipalchemists.com. I also have an Instagram, oracle.rachel, where I'm reachable. And we both have Facebooks as well under the names that you mentioned earlier.
Great.
Yes, Jonathan, JONATHAN at Relationship Alchemists, plural. And we actually have a website, relationshipalchemists.com, that's going to be released in the coming weeks. We're putting the finishing touches on it, so we're excited to get that out there. Drop us an email. We offer coaching sessions, and we also do retreats with people. And in the future and later in the year, we're going to be coming out with some online classes. So we got a lot of things in the development pipeline.
Awesome.
And also, thank you. You asked great questions, and we'd love to be on your show again. I had a great time.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
I've loved having you. Awesome.
Yeah.
Much love.
They're fantastic. Yeah, much love to you too. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, my name is Liz Peterson. This is Raise the Vibe with Liz. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks, guys.
All right.